Good morning. Today's daf Yomi is Moed Katan Chavav 26 Moed Katan, but we're going to start 25b around 10 lines or 15 lines from the bottom. Kinach Navshe the Rabbi Yochanan. When Rabbi Yochanan died, Yosef Rabbi Ami Shiva v'Shoshim. Rabbi Ami was a student. He sat for him Shiva and also 30 days. I'm Rabbi Abba Braid Rabbi Chia. So Rabbi Abba, the son of Rabbi Chia, Barabba said to Rabbi Ami, he said, Rabbi Ami, the Abba Garmi Udavid. Rabbi Ami did this. He did this for himself. Means that he wasn't required to sit Shiva or Shloshim. On his own, he did it. Yeah. Even if he was your Rebbe who taught you great wisdom, you don't have to sit Shiva for him. You only sit Shiva for one day. You don't sit Shiva for the whole week. So he didn't need to sit for 7 and 30 days. Kinach nafshe the Rabbi Zera, when Rabbi Zera died, there was a eulogizer, professional eulogizer, and he said as follows: Eretz Shinar Hara, the land of Shinar, i.e. Babylon, conceived him, V'yalda, and gave birth to him. Eretz V'kidla Shiashuah, the land of Tzvi, the land of Israel, raised its delight. I know Amra Reket, Ki Avda Klichem Nasa. Woe now to her, says Tiberius, because she has lost her treasure. Reket is another name for Tiberius. We had this in the tractate of Megillah. Ki Nach Nafshe de Rabbi Avohu. By the way, Nach Nafshe is Lanuach, when the soul rests finally, because the soul goes through turbulence while it's alive. It's not an easy life. A lot of people, it's turbulent. So Kinach Nafshe de Rabbi Avohu, soul rested. Achitu Amude de Kezari Maya. So the pillars of Caesarea gushed forth water. But really, I have this other sefer here, which my friend Remeir showed me, a very, very old book, very, very old. Doesn't even have it. It's called Lishmoa B'Limudim, and he says he has a little bit of a different version of it. He says when they, not Maya but Dime, when they gushed forth, the pillars gushed forth tears, and then the Marzavi, the next one is tears in the Talmud, but his version is that the pillars of Caesarea gushed forth tears. Why? Because anybody who needed something in Caesarea would go to Rabbi Avohu. Everybody depended upon him, and he would help them. So even the pillars started crying when he died. When Rabbi Yossi died, Shafu Marzave de Tzipuri Dama. Then the gutters of Tzipuri pushed forth blood. But here also we could say it's dama, but also sometimes dima can also be tears too. So anyway, the Rabbi Yaakov is Chamiu Kochave B'Yamama. When Rabbi Yaakov died, the stars all of a sudden appeared during the day. The Rabbi Yassi, when Rabbi Yassi died, Iakru Kol Ilanya, the Rabbi Chia. Iakru Kol Ilanya. All the trees were uprooted. The Rabbi Chia Nachitu Kipe Denora Mirakia. When Rabbi Chia died, all the stars, the light flashed down from heaven. Kipe de Nora Mirakia, they're like lights coming down from heaven. So the stones of light, pillars of fireballs coming down from heaven. Rabbi Menachem Bar Yossi, when he died, the coins which had images on them became flat and smooth. Rabbi Tanchum Bar Chia is Katatsu Kohen Dartil. When Rabbi Tanchum Bar Chia died, all the statues were knocked over. The Rabbi Yashav, when Rabbi Yashav died, Yichatu Shivon Machtarta Ben Ardai. They dug, all the thieves were emboldened, and they started digging 70 tunnels in Nahardai. We know that when Rabbi Yashav recently died, Zecher Tzadik L'Bracha, several years ago, that week all the tunnels in Gaza were exposed. So they started digging tunnels and doing attacks that week. The Rav Hamnuna, when Rav Hamnuna died, Nachitu Kipa de Barda Merakia. Then the Kipa de Barda, there were stones of hail that came down from the sky. The Rabbi Yosef Nashu kipe defrasa dadi. When Rabba and Rav Yosef died, there were bridges that they broke and they touched each other. Well, Rashi in the manuscript explains that these were the walls that the bridges, like the retaining walls for the bridges, and they became close to each other. It was a shinoi that happened. Something different happened in the world. And Abai and Rabba Nasha kipe the digos dadi. When Abai and Rabba died, the Tigris's walls came to each other. This commentary explains, Lishmor B'Limudim explains that Abaye was engaged in Torah and Milos Chasadim. He was engaged in Torah and kindness. And Chesed, kindness, is described as water. So therefore, the bridges, the Kippei Diglas, which is where they gathered up the water, kissed each other. Rava was fasting, he says, praying for mercy, and the rain came until all the gutters of Mechuzah were overflowing with the water, and so therefore he had a hint to the water when he died. Okay, and Ramesharshia, were you trying to add something, David? Were you adding something? I thought you. Oh, Ramesharshia, when he died, Ton Dikli Shitzi, the palm trees produced thorns. This is, and again, Lashma B'Limudim says that this relates to what it says in the Yerushalmi at the end of Tractate Rosh Hashanah. The Ramesharshia, the name of Ida, it says by all the karbanos it's written chait, but by Atzeres it doesn't write chait. So Hashem says, since you accepted Torah upon yourself, I'm going to look at you as though you didn't sin your whole life. And so therefore, the thorns that the lamb produces, it's a sign from Adam Arishon, that it says the earth will produce thorns. Therefore, when Masharshia was alive and he accepted the Torah, there was no thorns. But now that he died, then the thorns came back again to the world. And that's just tremendous chiddush in Lashma B'Limudim. Just unbelievable interpretations. Anyway, Ton Rabbana, and the rabbi said, Ve'elu Karayim, we're on top of 26a. These are the tears, She'em Mesachim, that if you make these tears, you're not able to mend them forever. What are the tears that you're never able to mend? Korah Aviv V'imo, somebody tears for his father and his mother. Rabbo Shalim Do Torah, or he tears his garment for his Rebbe who taught him Torah. Tosfos offers two explanations: either the teacher who taught you the most Torah or any Torah. Tear your garment, and you can never mend it. Nasi, the prince of the community, the head of the court. If you hear bad things, you have to tear your garments. If you hear what they say is a blessing for God's name, it's a euphemism. They don't even want to say the words one who pronounces a curse, so they call it the blessing of God's name. I'll say for Torah Shenisraf, if Rahman al-Islam, there's a Torah scroll that's burnt. If you see the city of Judah, see the Temple Mount in its destroyed state, where you see Jerusalem, and all these cases, you have to tear. But if you tear the garment for Jerusalem, you just have to be Mosif al Yerushalayim. You don't have to tear again for Jerusalem, then you just extend it. Gemara says, let's see the source for the idea of tearing your garment. And how do we know you have to tear your garment for your father, your mother, and your teacher who taught you Torah? It says, because it says, Elisha saw Elijah the prophet going up to the sky, and he shouted out, Father, 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 chariot of Israel and his horsemen. So Avi, Zeh Aviv, Vima, that first of father and mother. Rechav Yisrael Parashav, Zeh Rabbo Shalom the Torah. This is the Rebbe who taught him Torah. My mashma. How does that mean? How is that implied? Could the entire game Rabbi Yosef, like Rabbi Yosef taught, Rebbe, the Tav Lahonli Yisrael, but Salusta, Mirisichon Parashan. The Rebbe, you're better for us with your prayers than all the horsemen and the chariot. As we say in the prayers that we say every morning, they call out for the horsemen and for the chariots. They call out for the chariots and the horsemen, but we call out in the name of God. So, and how do we know that you're not allowed to mend it, completely mend it? That Elisha took his garments and he tore it into two. So the Gemara says, the verse says, from the fact that it says he tore it into two, I know that it's two. It's torn into two forever. Fine. So he says, Reish Lakish says, Rabbi Yochanan, why is he tearing? Why is Elisha tearing the garment for Eliyahu? Why just still alive? So why are you tearing your garment? I'm like, even he said, no, since he says he never saw him again, with respect to him, it's like he's dead. Nasi va'av bezdin v'shmuas haros. We know, and how do we know you tear your garment for the prince, the head of the court, and if you heard bad tidings? Because it says, Vayachazek David bivgadav, David took a hold of his garment, Vayikraim. After David heard about the attack of the Philistines on Saul and Jonathan, it says he took a hold of his garment and he tore it. V'gam kol Hashem asher ito. Also, all the people with him tore their garments. Vayispedu, vayivku, they eulogized and they cried. Vayatzumu ad erev, and they fasted until the evening. Al Shaul val Yonasan, for Saul and for Jonathan his son. For the people of God and the house of Israel, kinafu b'charev, because they fell by the sword. So Shaul's and Nasi, this teaches us that you cry for the king, for the prince. Yona's son, Ze'av Bezin, that teaches us you cry for the head of the court. For the people of God and the house of Israel, this is for bad tidings. Maybe you need all these things in order to tear your garments. I'm like, no, since it says the word al each time, it interrupts the matter. You need just any one of them. Do you really tear your garments for bad tidings? But then they say to Shmuel, Katal, Shavor, Malka, Tracer, Alpha Yudai, Mazigas Kezari. They said to Shmuel that King Shabur killed 12,000 Yidden in Mazigas Kezari. He killed 12,000 Jews in this place called Mazigas Kezari, V'Lokara. And Shmuel didn't tear his garments. So the Gemara says, no, well, Amr, when do we say you have to tear your garments? El Barov Tzibor, only when you have majority of the Jewish people there. Kamaisa Shahaya. I like the incident that happened with Saul. When Mikatel Shabar Malka Yudai, the Gemara says, wait, did King Shabur really kill all these Jews? Shabar Malka Shmuel. Shabar Malka himself said to Shmuel, Teisili, I'm going to get a lot of reward. I never killed any Jews. The Gemara says, yeah. Those Jews caused themselves to die. That's why they didn't tear his garment. Because of the rebellion, they were playing their instruments, they were rebelling against King Shabor. That's what caused the gates of Ludikaya to be broken. I mean, say they caused it, so you don't have to feel sorry for them. Berkas Hashem, and how do we know that for the quote unquote blessing of God's name, you're required to tear your garment? The Gemara tells a story about Eliakim during the time of Chizkiyahu. Vayavo Eliakim ben Chalkiah Asher Abayis v'Shevna. So from Yochanan Asaf Hamaskir Al Chizkiyahu Kurei Begadim. They had heard of Berchas Hashem, and so therefore they came running with torn clothes to Chizkiyahu. And so therefore that's how we know you have to tear your garments. The rabbis taught Tan Rabbanan Echad Hashemeya. One who hears and one who hears the Birkas Hashem and one who hears it from one who heard it. Chayav l'kra. They all have to tear their garments. The Gemara says, "Va'edim einon chayav l'kra," but witnesses don't tear. Shekvar karo b'shah sheshamu. It's because the witnesses already tore their garments at the moment that they heard it. So the Gemara asks, "B'shah sheshamu ma'avi." What does it matter at the moment that you hear it? They're hearing it again now. Gemara says, no, don't think that if you heard it at the time you were hearing it and now you repeat it during the court that you have to tear your garments again. No, we're not going to say that. When Chizkiyahu heard this, he tore his garments, meaning to say, the king tore his garments, but they didn't tear. And how do we know that if you tear your garments for one of these cases, you don't mend them forever? The Gemara explains Asya Kriya. It says Kriya by Elisha, and it says Kriya here as well. So therefore, we know that if you have to Rahman al-San tear your garment for Sefer Torah, you also don't mend it ever. Sefer Torah shenisraf. How do we know if a Torah scroll is burnt? We know, and how do we know you have to tear your garments? Because it says the Chsiv Vayihi. It says in the verse Vayikro Yehudi shalosh shalosh ve'arba yikraeha v'tar hasofer v'ashlecha ha'esh asher ha'ach. That when Yehudi was reading the work that Jeremiah wrote in front of Yoakim, then he tore it out from the book, Maish, and they burnt it. And what were these things that he burned? Maish shalosh tot v'arba. What are these 3 or 4 stanzas? Amalei Yoakim. They said to Yoakim, "Cause of your Yirmiyahu, Sefer Kinos." Jeremiah has written a book of Kinos. This is what we call Eicha today. Amar lo Maksibe. So Yoakim says, "Well, tell me what's written in it." They said, "Eicha Yashva Badad." You're gonna all live on your own. He says, I'm not worried. I'm Malka, I'm the king. I don't have to worry about being by myself. I'm like, you're gonna cry all night. He says, no, I'm not crying. I'm Malka, I'm the king. I got it good. So then they said, go to Yehuda Mayoni, your people of Judah are gonna go into exile. He says, no, not me. I'm Malka, I'm the king. I'm not going into exile. Dark Tzion Avelus, they said the path of Zion is mourning. I'm Malka. He said, I'm not worried, I'm the king. All the people who are attacking you are now in charge. Oh, now he said the magic words. Now we get upset. He said, who said this? Because God is God is taking stock of all of its sins. So Hashem is going to punish you. So Yaakov cut out all the times God's name was mentioned in Eicha, and he burnt it in the fire. This means that they did not fear, they did not tear their garments and called to bow and mikra. This teaches us that they are required to, generally speaking, tear their garments. Maybe he was tearing his garments not because of the burning of God's name, but because of the bad tidings that he heard. No, it hadn't yet happened. This was a prediction for the future. So you can't tear your garments on a prediction for the future.
So it had to be the burning.
Had to be the burning of Hashem, of the Birkas Hashem. If somebody sees a Torah scroll that's burned, he has to tear it twice. One for the parchment, one for the writings. It says, after the king, Yoakim burnt the scroll and the words. The Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna were sitting in front of Rabbi Abba. You need to go to the bathroom. He put his tefillin on the couch. An ostrich came along. Yeah, let me just finish this one sentence. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, what were we going to say?
Well, it says here, sees a remnant of a Sefer Torah burned. So let's say you go to a museum, and in there you see a Torah that was rescued from Europe or from Middle East.
That's a very good question.
And you see all kind of the burnt you can see was rescued from a fire or the experienced fire. I mean,
so Meyer is asking a very good question. So let's say you go to a museum and you see a Torah scroll that was burnt. So that's a very good question. But so the thing is, I'll tell you 2 things about that. One, Moshe Feinstein was asked if you're even allowed to display such a Torah in a shul, and he ruled that you could. But now about this, whether or not you could, whether or not you'd have to tear, I would say most likely you wouldn't have to tear, because the Shiloh was asked about, there was a big fire in Prague, and they heard about the Torah scrolls burnt, but they didn't actually see them. So they said, no. We'll see from the conclusion of the Gemara, it's only if you see it being done while it's being done and with maliciousness, not if it was accidentally burnt. So no, you wouldn't have to tear into those circumstances.
Okay.
So Shkoyach, a very good question. So it says, you have to tear it twice. As it says, so they were sitting there, and then the ostrich came along. He said, the ostrich came along, wanted to swallow it. Says, well, I would have had to tear it twice. Why would you think you'd have to tear it twice if the ostrich ate it? I had once an incident. Also, and I came in front of Rav Masna, and he didn't know the answer. Also, coming to Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda said, Amar Shmuel, O Amar El Bizro, Kamas Shaya. When do you have to tear for a Torah scroll? If they did it with force, meaning with malicious intent, and like what happened with Yoyakim. Are Yehuda Mino, and how do we know that the cities of Judah need to be you need to tear your garment if you see the cities of Judah? Because it says Vayavon Hashem Mishchem, the people came from Shem, Mishiro, Mishamron, Shmonim Ish Megulachay Zakan Ukurei Begadim Mitkodim Umincha Vavona Biadim Lavi Beis Hashem. So they came there and they saw the cities of Judah, and then it says that they had torn garments. So Amar Rabbi Chavo, Amar Ua Bira, Amar Rabbi Lazar, Haroa Yehudas Bechurbanan. Somebody sees the city of Judah in their state of destruction. What do they say? Amar Arei Kotchecha Hayu Midbar V'Korea. He says your cities of Judah became like a wilderness, and then he tears them. This is the verse from Isaiah 64. So he says Arei Kotchecha Hayu Midbar, and he tears it. Yerushalayim Bechurbanan. He says Sion Midbar I saw Yerushalayim Shemama. Zion was a wilderness, Jerusalem was desolate, and he tears it. Beis Hamikdash b'churbanon, the temple, and it's destroyed. He says, Beis Kochenu v'Tifertenu asher halucha avosenu hayol esrefat eish v'kol machmadenu hayol charban v'korea. The temple, it's in its destroyed state. He says from Isaiah 64 verse 10, our holy city and its glory that our forefathers praised was now burnt, and all of its delights became destroyed. So now and then he tears his garments. Korea al-Mikdash and Mosif Yerushalayim. You tear your garments for the temple, and you increase it for Jerusalem. V'raminu, is that really the case? Didn't we say in the Brisa, Echad ha-shamea v'echad ha-roeh, whether one hears or whether one sees? Kivan she'gio et Tzofim, once he reaches to Tzofim, Korea, he tears his garment. The Korea al Mikdash b'fnei atzmo, he tears once for the temple, and then another time for the temple. So how can we say that you increase it for Jerusalem when this price says you have to tear a second time for Jerusalem? So the Gemara says, "Lokasha had to paga b'mikdash b'reish, had to paga b'Yerushalayim b'reish." It depends which one you see first. If you see the temple first, then you have to tear again for if you came in contact with Jerusalem first, then you have to tear again for the temple. But if you see the temple first, then you just increase it for Jerusalem. You don't have to tear a second time. For all these tears, you can make like a crude covering up of it, crude mending, but not a complete mend. Alexandria. It means that you can't do a complete mend like they did in the Alexandrian leaf. So okay. So Ramon is like a double, like a loop of what you stitch together. Sulamon is where you make the stitches look like a ladder, so they're so far apart. Sholon is also very similar to the Sulamot one. It's like a ladder, but they're even farther apart. And Lolotan is where you fold over the shirt and you sew it up then. So on the top of 26 feet, Tanur Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Korea mitoch hashalal, mitoch hamalal, mitoch halakid. If you go to any of these like crude stitches, and that's where you do the tear from, mitoch hasulamos lo yatsa, you didn't fulfill your obligation because it's like it was already torn. So you didn't fulfill your obligation. Mitoch ha'inchoy, from the mend, yatsa, you fulfill your obligation. Amarav chazdo be'ichoy Alexandria. That's if it was really mended like the Alexandrian mend. What you're allowed to do is you turn your garment upside down so the top is now on the bottom, and then you can mend it. And Shimon Elazar says, he says, no, even then you can't mend it. Just like the seller can't mend it, it's a law in the object. The buyer also can't mend it. Therefore, the seller needs to tell the purchaser. The rabbis taught, the first tear you do is a tefach, which is 4 fingers. And the addition is 3 fingers. That's the position of Rebbe Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says the beginning of the tear is 3 fingers. And the addition is just a little bit. Rabbi Meir, so Rabbi Yehuda says, the law says the law is like Rabbi Meir by tearing, the law like Rabbi Yehuda by Tosefes, and the law is like Rabbi Yehuda by Tosefes. The Rabbi Meir says that the tearing is a tefach. And Yehuda says that Tosefes is kol shel. And Tayanam Yachi also we learned the first tear is a hand breadth, i.e., 4 fingers. The Tosefes kol shel, and the additional one, the addition is just a little bit. Tanarabanan Amrlo Meis Aviv Vikara. They told him his father died, and he tore the garment. Meis Beno. They told him his son died. Rahosif, and he added on to it. So then, what do we say? Tachto Mesacha Elyon Mesacha. He can sew up the bottom because that's for his son, but not for the father. The one for father and mother, you never hem completely. Meis Beno Vikara. Let's say he told him his son died and he tore. Meis Aviv Rahosif. And then the father tore and he added it on. Elyon Mesacha. So for the son, he can hem it up. But Tachto Mesacha. But the one for the father, he cannot hem up ever. Meis Aviv, Meis Imo, Achav, Meis Achoso. Let's say his father and his mother died, but also then his brother and his sister. Korea Kra Achadol Kol. He does one tear for all of them. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says Al Kulan Kra Achad, for all of them he does one tear. Al Aviv ve'imo Kra Achad, but he does another one for the father and the mother. Fishaimo Sifin Al Kra Aviv ve'imo, because you don't add on to the tear of your father and your mother. My time of Nachmar Yitzchak Fisha Einon B'Tosefes. Because that's just halacha, that the father and the mother cannot be part of the adding on. That's how Rashi explains it. Komar ein bedin shemosif alan. They're not in the same parsha that you can add on to them. Okay. Amar Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. So Shmuel says the law is like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, that you don't do one tear for the father or the mother with the other relatives. The Shmuels really say this. Shmuel says the law is like the lenient one with respect to mourning, and so therefore you should be able to do one tear for all of them. So my answer is no. Mourning is different than tearing. By mourning we follow the lenient approach, but by the tearing it's not really a law of the mourning. It's something else. It's something else in the actual mourning, and so therefore you don't. You don't do one tear. You don't follow the lenient position. Someone explain, says the Ritva, that the reason is mourning is a rabbinic obligation, whereas the tearing is a biblical obligation. But most say that the tearing is also all rabbinic, and so therefore the Gemara means to say that even though both are rabbinic, Shmuel says this law only by mourning and not by the tearing. Until what point on the garment do you tear it? Until your navel. Some say until the heart. And now for there's a hint to it that says it says in the verse, you shall tear your heart, says yo, but not your garment. I mean, don't waste your time with just technical fulfillment of the law. Tear your whole heart. Once you reach the navel, you distance yourself by 3 fingers, and then you tear the garment. Distance yourself by 3 fingers, and then you tear. If the garment tears became full in front, you turn it to behind you. If it became full above, then you turn it upside down. But if you just tear the first time from the bottom from the side, you've not fulfilled your obligation. Only the Kohen Gadol tears from below out of his dignity. If one says if you have 2 deaths within the same week, then you have to make a new tear each time. But after the Shiva, if you have a death, then you can just go back and add on to the first tear. The other opinion says, no, the first 30 days you have to tear each new, and after 30 days, you can just add on to the old tear. Why is the one who says that you tear it during Shiva a second time? Because you're not allowed to crudely sew it up. So you have to do a new tear. And because you weren't allowed to sew it up, and so therefore, since you're not allowed to sew it up even in this crude manner, and if you're going to just add on to it, it looks like one tear. But after Shiva, that you've already sewn it up, then it's clear that you're doing it for a different person. But if that's the case, Adam or Isha shall alter. What about the fact that a woman could sew it up immediately? Excuse me, which means even in the middle of Shiva. Hachinami, she should therefore also be allowed to add on. So Gemara says, Hasa Mishum Kvod Isha. Now that there we only allow her to do it because of the dignity of the woman. Man number same question. Man number called Shloshim Korea Mai. The one who says that you have to tear all 30 days. A new one is because you can't push it behind you. The Lonitain Achoto, because you can't mend it. Well, father and mother, you're never allowed to mend it. If that's the case, you should have to tear a new one. Gemara says, no, it's not a law of the tearing, it's just Mishum Kamava of the Imo. So that's just being done out of dignity for the father and the mother, not for the law of tearing. All right, we'll stop here. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address them.